Welcome to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive with Dr. Rebecca Risk. Do you ever feel that even though nothing seems seriously wrong and you pass all the medical tests, that you still feel that your health, pain, and fatigue are completely out of control? It doesn't have to be that way. Listen to the tips and suggestions given on our program today and take back control of your health. Now, here is Dr. Rebecca Risk.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Falling Through the Cracks. Today, we're talking with Dr. Zach Bush. He is one of the few triple board certified physicians in America with expertise in internal medicine, endocrinology and metabolism, and hospice palliative care. The breakthrough science that Dr. Bush and his colleagues have delivered offer profound new insights into human health and longevity. Dr. Bush, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on.
You know, I'm really excited to talk to you. I heard you speak at a conference a few weeks ago, and I love the message that you're trying to get out there. And you've got so much science backing up everything that you're saying. I think it's just amazing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It wouldn't happen without many of you out there getting the word out. So thank you for making this happen.
Oh, thank you. So, we're going to talk a lot about what, the message you're trying to get out there, but what got you headed in this direction? I mean, you have such a broad background, and then what you're doing is so different, or maybe to you it makes sense, but can you just tell us how you got to the point where you are now?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me either in some ways. It is a very non-linear path, of course, and I think life is as unpredictable as it needs to be to get us to where we need to be. And so my story is kind of common in that way, and that it's been a series of events to get me to do the science that we're doing now. Historically, I was trained, as you mentioned there, in internal medicine and was doing hospital-based care in that environment, everything from the bone marrow transplant unit for cancers to the cardiac floors to the liver disease and everything else. So just seeing a lot of chronic end-stage disease in hospital systems. And that increased my interest in endocrinology, thinking that I would like to get towards something more along normal human biology rather than just doing drug management of chronic disease. And so that was the history of kind of my journey in the hospital systems and all of that. Subsequently, the effort has been to kind of find the root cause of disease, and I was going down the avenue of cancer research at the time and developing chemotherapies that were from nutrition sources. I was doing vitamin A compounds that could help kill cancers, and so that was my journey towards nutrition, even though I didn't realize it at the time. But after a few years of studying vitamin A compounds, I realized that this was a naturally occurring compound from carrots and other fruits and vegetables, and started getting into nutrition as kind of an angle. And around that same time, in the mid-2000s, we were seeing a lot of reports coming out that we could reverse diabetes and cancer and other diseases through radical nutritional changes. And so all of that inspired me to start a nutrition clinic in 2010. I had to leave the university to do that. I had tried to start that in the universities, but I had run into some bureaucratic roadblocks to kind of creating an outside-the-box program like that. So started my own clinic in 2010 in rural Virginia. Really went to the poorest county in Virginia to see if we could find a way to impact the most underserved environment with a nutritional program to help them reverse the extreme burden of chronic disease we were seeing in the impoverished areas. A lot of obesity, a lot of diabetes, a lot of cancers, a lot of end-stage kidney disease and the like. And so we put together a very aggressive nutritional program that was a plant-based program for reducing inflammation and getting nutrients into the body of these people that had really been living in a food desert. Along that journey, found that a lot of them were not responding to their dietary changes as the textbooks would have us believe they should. There was a number of them that would go ahead and completely reverse their trajectory. They'd suddenly improve their diabetes, their weight loss would be almost instantaneous, their cancers would go into remission, all kinds of miracles would happen. But then there was a huge portion of the population that either did not improve or, most concerningly, seemed to get worse on health food. And that group that got worse eating some of the healthiest foods on the planet was intriguing to me, and that started to lead us down the avenue of kind of looking into the food itself. Was there something flawed in the food? And ultimately, that did turn out to be the case. It turned out that if you look at the nutrients in kale or tomatoes or any of the great fruits and vegetables we have on the table these days have a fraction of the nutrients, a fraction of the medicinal quality that we would expect them to have decades past. And so that led us down the avenue of trying to understand soil for the first time. I had never looked at soil science before. And I was reading through an 80-page white paper on soil science and came upon a molecule that looked a lot like the chemotherapy I used to make. And that brought a whole new kind of blinders off of maybe the medicine we're missing is not in the plants, but the medicine should be in the soil. And that ended up being the incredible shift in my course towards understanding soil, its relationship to the microbiome, which is the bacteria and the fungi and all the bugs that live there to create the nutrients in our food, and ultimately how they transfer those nutrients into the plants that would make the medicines that would help us reverse the chronic disease burden that we have today. So today I find myself running a biotech company. We do a lot of work with the microbiome. We do research around what's happened to the chemical farming industry, how it's destroyed the microbiome, not just in our soil, but also in our gut, and left us really devoid of life on a lot of levels. And with that, we have a lot of diseases that spring forth. And by getting this nutrient environment corrected and start to support the microbiome in the gut and the soil, we see extraordinary results. And so that's a long and winding trail to today for me.
I loved hearing that. I think nutrition is very important, but it doesn't get talked about a lot. I mean, it's sort of, it's in books and shows like mine, but if you go to your doctor, they're not going to talk to you about how important this is. So I think it's very valuable that you're sharing all this information, because, listening to some of your talks, I just think what you're sharing is, it's almost new. I mean, in a way, it's not, because we should all know this, but it seems like it's just very new knowledge for us to realize what we're doing to our planet.
Yeah, I think it's, you would think that food being something that we all consume every day and it's necessary for life, you'd think as scientists we would have wrapped our minds around and wrapped our research into food in such detail, and yet it's probably the least studied environment that we deal with. We know cigarettes and cancer and all that way better than we know the food we eat. And importantly, we really have lost track as physicians as to what are the chemicals that are going into our food chain. And so it was a huge, here I was studying nutrition, I was teaching nutrition. I had no idea what molecules go into Roundup, for example, which is the most common weed killer that we spray onto our foods. Roundup is the reason we genetically modified our plants. And so Monsanto created the GMO, genetically modified organisms of corn, soybeans, sugar beets, etc. And in doing so, they started to allow farmers to spray our food directly with this chemical, Glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. And that journey into that kind of aha exploration of, oh my gosh, when did we as human beings outsource our food production to chemical companies that heretofore were making plastic and chemical warfare, chemical compounds to destroy the jungles of Vietnam, like the Agent Orange compounds and that sort of thing. So it's a strange turn of political and business events that led to the fact that the vast majority of our food created in this country is being produced by chemical companies.
Well, we are told that Roundup and GMO foods are safe for us. Are you finding the opposite with your research?
Our research screams the opposite. There is nothing safe about the chemicals that we spray on that genetically modified food. And so there's a great debate still raging over whether the gene modification of those plants is safe for humans, and that has not been proven to be safe yet. There's an assumption of safety there, but no proof. And so that's a concern in and of itself. But what we've really shown, and many labs around the world have shown without question, now of course the World Health Organization has come out in the last couple of years to say that glyphosate is a probable carcinogen. I would say that there's no probable about it. It's absolutely a carcinogen. Even the data coming right out of Monsanto has proved that it causes cancer in every animal you put this in. And so it's animal cancers, it's human cancers. We've got a cancer epidemic on our hands that started as soon as we started putting this directly into our food. We have every chronic disease epidemic happening in parallel the last 30 years. It's Parkinson's in males, Alzheimer's in women, attention deficit and autism in children, asthma, allergies. It goes on, and that's just actually the A's so far. You could go through the whole alphabet of chronic diseases that are currently happening right now, and it's all going to tie back to the advent of chemical farming. And so I don't think there's any question in the public health data at this point that we have fundamentally changed the risk of chronic disease by screwing with the microbiome through the use of this glyphosate. The glyphosate was actually patented as an antibiotic, antiparasite, antifungal. It kills all the living organisms in the soil, and that, of course, leads to the sterility of the soil, which means you're not going to get nutrient delivery, which means you're going to have a much narrower trajectory of nutrition delivery to the food you eat. Furthermore, you're going to have a blockage of the production of amino acids. So glyphosate, by even Monsanto's reporting in their patents, show that glyphosate blocks the ability of plants, bacteria, and fungi in the soil to make the essential amino acids that are called aromatic amino acids. These include things like tryptophan, tyrosine, phenylalanine. The first two of those are the precursors to the neurotransmitters in our brain. And so you think of things like serotonin and dopamine. Those are made from these aromatic amino acids that should be coming from our food. But we've sprayed all of our food and soil with a chemical that blocks the ability of those vital building blocks for not just neurotransmitters, but hundreds of thousands of proteins in our body can now no longer be made by our plant system. And the reason we call them essential amino acids is because our human body doesn't even have that enzyme pathway. And so we can't produce them. We're dependent upon our diet, we're dependent upon our environment to produce those for us. So here we have gone and sprayed our soils with a chemical that kills bacteria, fungi, wipes out the micronutrients, and then makes devoid the building blocks for life, the building blocks for normal brains, the building blocks for proteins in our food chain. So it's an extraordinary mistake and an extraordinary kind of cover-up that's happened. And from the chemical companies, they keep screaming, this is safe, and yet we look at the public health data, and it's so clear that every country that we move chemical farming into, within 5 years, is manifesting diabetes, obesity, metabolic collapse, and within 10 years, you see the collapse of the microbiome to the point where people are getting an increased rate of cancer and the rest. So we really have a global problem now. The vast majority of glyphosate is made in China now. It came off patent in 2007. And so every chemical company in the United States is making it. It's no longer a Monsanto issue. All the companies worldwide are making this chemical. We're currently dumping around 4 billion pounds into the environment per year. So it's arguably the most ubiquitous chemical on the planet.
This is it's pretty scary to think about this, and knowing now it's not a Monsanto issue, which means it's more available. I mean, it was very available before, but I think we're not realizing what we're doing. We need to bring more awareness to this issue. We are going to take a quick break. We're talking today with Zach Bush. We'll be back shortly.
Become our friend on Facebook. Post your thoughts about our shows and network on our timeline. Visit facebook.com/Voice America.
As we move into our 40s and 50s, the elements of age catch up with us just a bit. Many of us have had children, which brings some of their own aging elements. Health issues come and go, but they always seem to come more frequently. Our bodies start responding a little differently than they have in the past. Listen for the High Energy Hour with Donna Guinois. We'll help you understand the changes and how to keep your health in top shape as you age gracefully. Tune in every Tuesday at noon Pacific Time and 3 p.m. Eastern on Voice America Health and Wellness.
Addiction can affect our relationships, our families, our home, and work lives, but most importantly, ourselves. The recovery process can do wonders in the lives of people suffering from active addiction and also for those that love them. It's not just 12-step programs, but so much more. It's learning how to live life on life's terms. If you can relate to these issues or love someone who does, start with yourself. Start by tuning in to Miracles in Recovery with host Ray Lynch, Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness channel. Hope is in your corner.
Today's woman faces a stressful world when it comes to staying healthy. We are bombarded by media messages with contradicting ideas about fitness and nutrition. We need to keep our diet, relationships, and stress in check. It's time to get the right message and have the most fun. Join hosts Andrea Beeman, Lisa Lutan, and Michelle Fennighaus for Healthy View Radio. It's health and happiness in one show. Every Thursday at noon Eastern Time and 9 a.m. Pacific Time on Voice America Health and Wellness.
Opinions, options, answers. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
You are listening to Falling Through the Cracks with your host, Dr. Rebecca Risk. To reach the program today, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email directly to Dr. Risk. The email address is anantacalgary@gmail.com. Now, back to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today we're talking with Dr. Zach Bush. So, Dr. Bush, before the break, you mentioned that we were spraying glyphosate on our soil and we're killing, the bugs in the soil. But, there can be some people that argue that we don't want those there. So can you just explain to us why those are so important?
So the importance of the glyphosate.
The soil, the healthy soil. Why should we be protecting what's in the soil right now? Yeah.
So there's a few elements there in the soil that merit great importance to us as human beings. One of them is certainly the biodiversity, and so if you've heard of the microbiome, you're reading the literature these days. But the microbiome has become the biggest story of this decade in the science world. The 2000 to 2010 was kind of the decade of the brain, where we learned more about the human brain than we ever had in human history, and was a huge focus of kind of international research. I would say that 2010 to 2020 has become the decade of the microbiome. We found out that the brain and every other organ system in the body is intrinsically linked to the health of the microbiome. The microbiome is a description of the ecosystem of the microscopic organisms, and so bacteria, fungi, parasites, viruses, this extraordinary spectrum of life and biology that we see coming out of the world of the invisible is really dictating human health through many different mechanisms. One of those mechanisms is the genome itself, and so the genes that we produce in our body come from our DNA. Those genes are dictating protein synthesis, or the production of different proteins that build a human body. And so the interesting thing about the genome of the human is that it's actually pretty limited. We only have 20,000 human genes, which is pretty ridiculous because a flea has 30,000 genes, so we're only two-thirds as complicated as a little flea when it comes to the genes that we produce. This was a very extraordinarily challenging realization in the 1990s as we started to decode the human genome as to how is it possible that we build this complex human body with over 200,000 proteins all coordinated in 70 trillion cells. how do we manage to do that from just 20,000 measly genes? And that journey has taken us down the realization that our genes are modified, or the behavior of the gene as to what protein it makes is modified constantly by the environment that we live in. And so each gene is now recognized to be able to make over 200 different proteins. Some of them can make thousands of proteins, depending on the microscopic environment around that DNA strand that would build the protein. And so we have this blueprint for human bodies that we inherit from our parents. So with half of our genetic information from mom, half from dad, comes together to make these 46 chromosomes, and they go on to kind of determine what is their hair color, what is the eye color, what is the height going to be of the individual. Now, all of these things are determined by the genes, but then what's not determined by the genes and is more determined by the environmental effect on them is, how much muscle mass is that individual going to have? What is the resting metabolism of that individual? What cancers is that individual predisposed to? What is the blood pressure of that individual? What is the propensity for autonomic dysfunction that would cause migraines or sexual dysfunction or sleep disorder or any number of more mild seeming disorders is going to come from that effect of the microbiome programming the human genome. And so just an extraordinary relationship that we have to soil that's changing the bodies we build. And if we look at the children of today, we realize we are building children that are missing the components of life. They are really missing the opportunity to thrive. In the 1960s, before the advent of all this chemical farming, we had a chronic disease burden in the United States of 4%. And so 4% of the population from child to adult to geriatrics had a chronic disease diagnosis. Today, with children born after 2000, there's a 46% prevalence of chronic disease by age of 18. And so we are birthing children that are no longer resilient and are suffering chronic disease at extremely early ages. We see an explosion of lymphoma, leukemias, all kinds of different brain cancers. We have all of this weird disease bursting out of our children because their bodies don't have the environmental input to build healthy human immune systems, healthy human cellular communication, all these things. So the genome is extremely important. Second thing that comes out of the soil that is not talked about is the microbiomes communication network. And this is a discovery of our lab in 2012. So we're only 6 years into this journey of really understanding this brand new area of communication. But communication down at the biochemistry level, way before you get to hormones and genetics, starts at the communication of electrons. Interestingly, the human body is much more electrical process than it is molecular. And so at the fundamental fabric of our body, we communicate through the transfer of electrons just like you would through a computer circuit board. You can imagine a circuit board on a computer or a big transfer center, passing information in little digital dots to and fro. The same thing is happening in the human body to create communication lines and transfer of information from our gut to our bloodstream, from our bloodstream to the immune system to the organ systems. Across all of these complex systems that we have this coordination of information through something called Redox Chemistry. And redox is a contraction of two words, reduction, which is the donation of an electron, and oxidation, which is the absorption of electron. So it's almost like dominoes, where you have these little electrons that are infinitesimally small and infinitesimally short in their exchange process. Down at the millionth of a second, we transfer these electrons to and fro. And so this kind of digital dominoes that'll send an electron pulse through large distances is what transfers information. And the aha moment that we had in 2012 studying soil was, oh my gosh, that fundamental transfer of electrons, that fundamental system of information exchange and intelligence begins at the microbiome, not at the human system. And that aha moment was really profound because my research had been in mitochondria, which is another category of species that are non-human, look a lot like bacteria, but they live inside of our cells. And mitochondria are responsible for everything from fuel production to the lifespan of your cells to the suicide of your cells in the case of damage or cancer. The mitochondria should kill the cell through this apoptosis or programmed cell suicide. And so they are extremely important, and the main way in which they communicate is also through redox molecules. And so the realization that bacteria and fungi from the soil and from our gut can actually talk directly to these critical modulators of our energy levels and our repair systems, it was a really exciting moment of, wow, this is why, as we've turned our back on nature, as we've separated ourselves from nature by killing the microbiome in the soils and in our foods and in our own guts, we've suddenly lost this communication network, and we're no longer fueling the mitochondria with nutrients, and we're no longer providing those mitochondria the information to respond correctly to the environment.
Well, this sounds pretty devastating that this is going on and basically being ignored. I mean, we're still using pesticides and herbicides. I mean, in my community 2 days ago, they sprayed for herbicides, and I was preparing for this show, and I thought, geez, what are we doing? We're still stuck in this thought that we shouldn't have dandelions in our grass, and we're spraying where kids and dogs play.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And we've got a social and political norm around chemical treatment of our cities, our parks, everything else. And where we see the highest levels of Roundup do happen to be on our playing fields, the soccer fields, the football fields, and the golf courses. These are the highest environments of Roundup and glyphosate that we'll see. And our bodies are absorbing that through the skin, through the air. We've dumped so much glyphosate in the planet right now that about 75% of the rainfall and 75% of the air we breathe in the United States is now contaminated with Roundup. And so all of the countries of the world are fast on our heels. Canada is certainly right in the same ballpark there. Mexico's coming on strong. Mexico is actually a dumping ground for a lot of our even more toxic chemicals that don't get approved in the U.S. will end up in Mexico and Central America. Brazil is the number one consumer in South America and is about to surpass the U.S. in glyphosate usage per acre. And so we've got this steep there. And we think of Europe as being super clean, but it turns out that Europe has been spraying glyphosate on many different crops since the early 2000s. And so it's being used in all areas of agriculture worldwide. And unfortunately, I think China is probably going to be hit the hardest in that it's being dumped alongside a lot of other toxins that are entering the body through the help of Roundup. So we've got just this whole globe that's suffering, and it's going to have an increasing amount of suffering as we separate ourselves from this environment. There's a lining here.
Yeah. It seems that you're saying 75% of the air has glyphosate in it. So even if we're eating organic and our homes we're not using chemicals, we're still being exposed. I mean, we think, we have to go outside, and then we're breathing this in, and it almost seems very scary to me that we're so exposed to something, even if we're choosing not to have it in our lives.
Yeah, it has become so ubiquitous we can't really escape it completely. And so, but the good news is, there is silver lining here, and so as consumers we can change the industry, right? And so we are very powerful to make change as we know the information, as we learn these details of first the presence of the chemicals, and then understand a little bit about what the chemicals are doing to the microbiome and then to our immune systems and the loss of our own kind of support systems within our body. That journey is very empowering to a consumer group that's willing to make a change. And so if we all start eating organic, we're going to force the industry to change very quickly. And I believe that's already afoot. We've got an organic industry moving in the United States that nobody could have predicted was going to be this robust 10 years ago. And so we've got this multi-billion-dollar pressure being put on the farming industry to produce more and more organic. And other countries are responding faster than our own farmers, not because our farmers don't want to change, it's just that our government's got them locked in debt with the chemical companies dictating their behavior, and so they're in a very difficult position to try to make these changes. But abroad, there's a huge response. Even Russia, which is an unexpected source for this, but Russia just announced in the last year that they're going to become the first completely organic food production country in the world by 2020 or something like that. So they're really seeing the opportunity to become a world leader in food production and food delivery of good, healthy, organic food, and that's a brilliant move by a government to see a global demand growing and move to fill that niche. A lot of good foresight for their own health of their country as well. So, here's a public health and radically brilliant economic move being made by Russia, and you think, what the heck is North America doing to allow the Eastern Bloc to make such a radical move and put us years behind the kind of economic advantage that we need to have. So you need to continue to be a part of that. If you're listening to this, you have an opportunity to become a part of this revolution by demanding more and more organic food in your life. And we've proven again and again that if you go strict organic in your household and you get glyphosate down to an absolute minimum that you can achieve, radical shifts in human health happen. And when I say radical, it's almost too good to be true over and over again. And the interesting thing is the speed at which the body recovers. When it gets real nutrients from real food that was grown in real soil that has an intact microbiome, the speed at which nature helps us recover is really mind-boggling. I'll watch patients who have been suffering poor health consequences for decades, getting sicker and sicker with every passing year, make a switch to a pure organic diet. And within 2 weeks, they can see reversal of things that are being taken decades to accumulate. And so I'm always just shocked and amazed and excited by the speed at which we heal, and the fact that these simple decisions that we make as families and as consumers can radically shift the life expectancy, the quality of life that we have, the health of our children, etc.
Oh, this is really encouraging. We're going to take a quick break. We're talking today with Dr. Zach Bush, and we'll be back shortly.
Think you've seen everything there is to see in online television? Let us surprise you. Visit voiceamerica.tv today for sports, health, business, and more on demand 24/7.
Do you ever have an off day? Or is your life positive and uplifting? Making Life Brighter is a forum for positive, inspired, and contemplative thought, showcasing experts in their fields, including authors, musicians, and artists. Your host, Winifred Adams, will bring to life topics to stimulate and make your life brighter. We want to hear from you. Be sure to tune in Thursdays at 10 a.m. Pacific Time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel.
Can grief be good for you? Absolutely. It gets your attention, helping you evaluate your choices and relationships. Your losses define who you are. Tune in each week for Good Grief with host Cheryl Jones. Our show features those who have made incredible transformations by grieving their losses. You'll learn how to find your courage and strength. You'll discover the important things in your life and how to let go of things that are less important. Good Grief airs live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Time, 5 p.m. Eastern on Voice America Health and Wellness.
Have you stopped to think seriously about hypnosis? Hypnosis can set you on your way to better health, can free you from anxiety, phobias, and so much more. Join host Inez Simpson for Hypnosis Everywhere, Inez Simpson and the Simpson Protocol. This show is for anyone from the experienced hypnotist practitioner to the merely curious. Inez Simpson offers tools and insights from the whole world of hypnosis, with guests and open discussions. Hypnosis Everywhere, the Simpson Protocol, airs live every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Voice America Health and Wellness.
Opinions, options, answers. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
You are listening to Falling Through the Cracks with your host, Dr. Rebecca Risk. To reach the program today, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email directly to Dr. Risk. The email address is anantacalgary@gmail.com. Now, back to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today we're talking with Dr. Zach Bush. So, Dr. Bush, before the break, we were talking about glyphosate. So what damage is that doing? So if we consume that and that gets into our gut, what exactly is happening there?
It's hard to imagine what could possibly be going wrong that could be pushing all of this chronic disease at once. All of these different organ systems, how can this be happening from one single chemical? And, the disease processes are broad, right? We've got autism that's gone from 1 in 5,000 children in the United States to 1 in 36. 1 in 5,000 in 1975 to today, 1 in 36. And so we've seen this logarithmic increase in Alzheimer's in women as well over the same period of time, Parkinson's in men. All these various cancers, breast cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer. And really interestingly, to prove out the glyphosate role in this, we can show that these diseases have centered around the highest areas of glyphosate exposure. So the whole Mississippi River Delta and the whole collection of the Mississippi River in the United States is the watershed that will pick up, some 85% of the glyphosate, which is a water-soluble toxin, from the United States and put it into one single water system. And so the Mississippi, interestingly, has become the focus of cancer in this country. In the 1990s, even as short back as 25 years ago, the vast majority of cancer deaths, or the highest rates of cancer, were always in the Northwest and the Northeast in the United States, and that had been a pattern stable for 100 years. And suddenly, over just a 15-year period, with the advent of GMO crops and the widespread spraying of glyphosate all over the Midwest, collecting in there, suddenly the highest rates of cancer in the entire developed world is the last 90 miles of the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. We call it Cancer Alley. Many of the people that live in those environments, especially those around on the farms, are on their third or fifth cancers on their bodies. And so we just see this decimation of human health along that river. Also, obviously, the highest rates of obesity, diabetes, and the other common chronic diseases there. So we've got this, disaster. And so, when we set out to understand the nutrition and the role of the microbiome, in 2010 we found 2012 we found little molecules there that would be the redox molecules of communication from the microbiome. We set out to study that in cancer and other diseases, and didn't expect to see the radical changes in all of our patients when we put those into play. And so we use a supplement now from fossil soils that are rich in the original microbiome information, and get this extraordinary explosion of health out of our patient population. And it's across all ages, and it's interestingly across all disorders that we see the same kinds of shift happening. And those fundamental shifts have to do with the immune system. And the immune system is located along the intestinal lining. And so some 80% of our antibody production from our immune system happens in this system that we call the GALT, the gastrointestinal associated lymphatic tissue. The GALT, the GALT there, is where we produce these antibodies to protect us from the outside world. And the reason it lines up along the gut is because that's our biggest exposure to the outside world. And so we actually have 2 tennis courts in the surface area of gut lining that runs from our sinuses all the way down to our rectum. And so the sinuses where you breathe are the beginning of your exposure to your environment. And then you've got, the back of your throat, you've got your esophagus, you've got the stomach, you've got small intestine, you've got large intestine. This is made of enormous billions and billions of barrier cells that are called epithelial cells that keep the outside world out and keep the inside of your body protected. That carpet layer of epithelial cells is held together by little proteins that look a lot like Velcro. They're just little connectors that keep one cell tightly to the other to create this coherent membrane or carpet of protection And that membrane is extremely thin. And so it turns out that it's only one cell layer thick. It's half the width of the human hair is this barrier system that keeps your body separated from the outside world. And the devastating thing that we've found in all of our science in our laboratories is that the number one target that glyphosate hits is the Velcro of your gut lining. And not just of the gut lining, the same Velcro holds together all of your blood vessels and your blood-brain barrier and your kidney tubules that should be doing the detoxification of your body. All of those are held together by the same Velcro. And glyphosate has this immediate damage to that whole system. And so an extraordinary realization of, wow, glyphosate is really killing the fabric of our bodies. It's destroying our cell identity, our self-identity at the molecular level by eroding these boundaries between the outside world and our immune system. The result of that boundary eliminating is that our body now has to fight everything that we eat, breathe, and eat. We're constantly in a food fight. Everything we eat, whether it's health food or not, can stimulate a huge immune response because stuff is getting into our immune system that should have been kept out. That could be things like chemicals in our food like we've been talking about, but it could also be naturally occurring compounds like fiber. The insoluble fibers of our diet are really important anti-cancer compounds for reducing colon cancer risk and the like. But if there's a leaky gut, if that membrane has been destroyed, the Velcro is now leaking, then we absorb those big fibers and other proteins that should have been kept out, and we can have a huge immune response. And so through this constant, attack on the immune system or the immune system attack on the outside world, we develop chronic inflammation. If you are continuously under an acute inflammatory injury response, you start to run out of the reservoir of antioxidants and other coping mechanisms, and ultimately will build this chronic inflammatory state where the immune system itself is adding to the fire here. And every time it reacts, it adds more fire, and the whole system is just always inflamed. And this is what we experience in the current modern world. We have chronic fatigue, chronic pain syndromes, insomnia, poor sex drive. We have depression, we have anxiety disorders, we have the whole sensory processing stuff with attention deficit and autism. We have the whole memory processing issues with the dementia climbing in the whole population. Now, really devastating reality that as you erode these boundaries with Roundup and glyphosate, and you start to leak all over the place, neither your immune system in the gut, nor your brain through the blood-brain barrier, nor your kidney tubules, and the whole vasculature are protected anymore. Everything is in this constant chaotic damage control state. And so that, I believe, is exactly the mechanism by which we've seen the developed world explode with chronic disease with the exposure to one chemical. It is the loss of the tight junctions, which is the Velcro. Without those tight junction Velcro proteins intact, we are in a constant war with our environment.
When I first heard you talk, you pointed out a geographic pattern with illnesses and where glyphosate was being sprayed. And we were at a Lyme conference, and I found this really interesting, that you were also saying that even Lyme isn't the epidemic, that this is the epidemic, that we are weakening our bodies so much that we're just leaving room for the illness to come.
That's exactly right. I think that we've come to, as integrative medicine doctors or even allopathic medicine doctors, we've seen this explosion of chronic Lyme disease throughout the many areas of the United States. But those areas tend to track with our agricultural environment. And so the heavier the agricultural environments, the more we're going to see of these invasive infections. Again, Roundup is this selective antibiotic, and so you've got this antibiotic that's being poured everywhere, destroying the microbiome in the soil, destroying it in our gut. And the result is we're going to end up with overrepresentation of some species that can grow weed-like. That'd be things like Candida, which is a yeast that can overgrow in these environments. We see overgrowth of Klebsiella and Clostridium, which are a couple of bacteria that are common. You've probably heard of C. diff, which is a common hospital-acquired infection now causing severe diarrhea. Just decimating the microbiome leads to this weed-like overgrowth. The issue, though, is that we start to blame the weeds for the problem. So we say, oh, well, we have C. diff must be the problem, or Clostridium is the problem, or your yeast, your candida is a problem. So you just need antifungals, you need more antibiotics, you need all this stuff, when in fact the problem is not too much bacteria or too much yeast. It's not enough of everything else. And so as physicians, we've been very slow to realize that what we're seeing is a perturbation of the terrain. It's a destruction of the terrain rather than some sort of invasive bacterial problem. The bacteria and the fungi, the yeast, the viruses, they're all actually here for our own survival. If they were against us, we would be dead. One of the things I lecture widely on is just the extreme volume of biologic life around us. We are so outnumbered by the microbiome that if it was truly against us, if the viruses were attacking us and we were always at risk of dying from viruses, bacteria, fungi, we would never survive a second. There's far too much of this life around us. We are a smidgen of the biologic life on Earth. And so that reality is, this whole nature is there to support us. And if we would just start living in concert with it again, if we would cooperatively live with our nature and allow it to provide the nutrients through the food chain that it's developed over millions of years of biodiversification of our foods, and then we've gotten to co-create in that environment, and we've gotten to create new vegetable and fruit strains through hybridization and growth of our gardens, and we have this co-creative opportunity to re-engage the garden, and that's ultimately your solution. So as we kind of wrap up the discussion on the problems at hand with chemical farming, the exciting solutions are right here in front of us. Is that, if we as consumers demand organic food, and even more so, if we as consumers start to grow our own food again, we're going to radically change the feasibility of chemical farming. And the chemical farmers are going to go out of business. The chemical companies will lose their market share as we start reclaiming our own food production effort. We don't have to go back to paleo times to see the power of growing our own food. At the end of World War II, the United States was growing 45% of its food in its backyard victory gardens. 45% of our food chain grown in our backyards. Today we grow less than 1,000th of 1%. And so it's just, we just do not grow food anymore as kind of a quote-unquote, modern society. And so we need to redefine what modern looks like. We need to redefine what technology looks like. We need to redefine what wealth looks like. And wealth should really be, a home that's thriving with organic plants living inside. In our windows, we can grow tomatoes, we can grow basil, we can grow mint, we can grow food in our own homes, even if we don't have a backyard. If we have a yard, then my goodness, we should be re-engaging that environment with the opportunity to grow our own food again. And so that's kind of the excitement that I have is that the consumer gets this information out there. We can fundamentally turn back the clock to the 1940s to 60s where we were actually a very healthy people. We had very low levels of chronic disease. If we don't do that, we're going to collapse as a nation. As a whole society of humans, we're collapsing. We are becoming infertile so quickly. 1 in 3 males in the United States is now infertile. 1 in 4 women is infertile. And so we are losing the ability to procreate as human beings, which is an extraordinary moment. We think of ourselves as a quote-unquote overpopulated Earth. That I really do not believe is true. I believe we're really reaching a tipping point where we're going to have a collapse of human life on this planet if we don't radically change the way we interact with that nature and support the microbiome in our bodies, support the microbiome in the gardens we grow our food and beyond.
That I definitely agree, and I just love the way that you're saying this. I mean, it sounds very dramatic, but I think, those of us that are looking at it from this viewpoint where you and I are, definitely can see that. We see that there is something wrong, that we're not heading in the right direction. And, it's not just the physical illnesses, but, people feel very lost and they feel lonely and depressed. And we need to make a change so that as you said, just changing what success is and what wealth is. I don't think wealth is an abundance of money. I think it, like you said, it is a home where people are healthy and happy.
Absolutely. And so, I think there's so much excitement that I have to continue to share with your group over time. I think what I'm sharing now is that getting back into nature is your solution. And so, if you are facing chronic disease, or you see these chronic conditions in your children, eczema, asthma, food sensitivities, environmental allergies, all of these things, the solutions are at hand. One resource is a documentary that's just being released right now. It's called Secret Ingredients. I think you can find it online at secretingredientsmovie.com. And that documentary documents the journey of 3 families that were suffering all kinds of different chronic disease conditions in the children and adults. And they were healthy families. These are middle American families that were in the upper middle class, had access to great food, were eating in the homes. They weren't, eating McDonald's. They weren't just fast food families at all. They were really in the top, 5% of health consumers as far as our current definition of nutrition. And yet they were suffering. And when they went on this journey to eliminate all genetically modified foods from their homes, you just can't believe the speed at which they recovered, and the diseases which just disappeared at hand. So I really encourage you to watch that for more encouragement over the Secret Ingredients. The producer of that one was really a big mover and shaker in the world of the anti-GMO movement. So Jeffrey Smith is his name. So lots of good stuff out there to further encourage you and your family that the solutions are at hand, and we as consumers have the power to change this industry.
Oh, thank you. Now, I'd love to talk to you for hours, but unfortunately, I only get an hour a week, so we are going to have to close up this show. But I want to encourage people to. We didn't even get to the some of the information you have and the product that you have. So, is there a place where people can find out more information about you and the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. So you can go to zachbushmd.com for more education. You can also just YouTube search me, Zach Bush, ZACHBUSH, and you can find a lot of my lectures online there. The product line that we make through our company that is extracting this communication network from soil, that is our website, www.restore4life.com. Restoreforlife.com will find you that, but you can also find links to the Zach Bush MD website as well, if you can just remember that one. So lots of opportunity for you to continue that educational experience. We've got hundreds of hours of content, podcasts, and recorded lectures as well. So that should keep you satiated.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much for joining me today and for doing the work that you're doing. I love that this is happening and that you're able to share this with me and my listeners.
Wonderful. I really appreciate you having me on, and the best of health to all of you. The effort to re-engage your nature is so fun on so many levels. You're going to enjoy it way beyond your food. Getting out into nature and interacting with the plant animal life around us is a joy on many levels. So good travels to you and good adventures ahead.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody for listening, and just be sure to make today a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive. Please join Dr. Rebecca Risk again next Monday at noon Eastern Time and 9 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness channel. We'll talk more next week.